The ground trembled beneath Mason Wilson's feet as the massive creature charged forward, its 6 tusks gleaming in the morning light. Behind it, 3 war machines twice the size of houses crumpled like toys. The alien Boar, now 12 feet tall at the shoulder, let out a battle cry that shook the air itself. The invaders scattered in terror as Goliath, once a runt left to die, became the wall between humanity and extinction. "They're retreating!" someone shouted from the settlement walls. "They're actually retreating!" Mason watched in awe as the creature he'd bottle-fed all those years ago smashed through alien technology that had decimated their defense forces. No one was laughing now. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The day Mason Wilson found the alien creature hadn't started remarkably. New Earth Colony Number 5, colloquially known as Hope's Landing, was entering its 7th standard year since establishment, and Mason was checking fence lines on the northwestern quadrant of his property. The agricultural tract he'd been assigned when they first landed wasn't prime real estate, but it was his, and he'd made something of it despite the rocky terrain and unpredictable weather patterns of this world. Hope's Landing sat on the fertile plains of Proxima Centauri b, the closest exoplanet to Earth's solar system. After the climate catastrophes of the mid-21st century, humanity had finally achieved viable interstellar transport. Thousands of colonists like Mason had volunteered to start fresh on a world that hadn't yet been ruined by human hands. The colony's scientists had assured everyone that Proxima b was devoid of large animal life. Some microbes and plant-like organisms, yes, but nothing that would pose a threat to human settlement. For 6 years, that had proven true, until the incident with the razorback herd. Nobody was quite sure where they came from. Some speculated they were native to Proxima b's unexplored northern continent. Others believed they'd stowed away on the last supply ship from Earth. The scientific consensus, however, was that the razorbacks were an invasive species from somewhere else entirely, perhaps brought by another alien race that had briefly visited Proxima b long ago. Whatever their origin, the razorbacks were now a problem. 6-legged boar-like creatures with tough exoskeletons and multiple tusks, they ravaged crops and threatened livestock. The Colonial Defense Force had organized a major hunt after numerous complaints, tracking the main herd to the mountains northeast of the settlement. Mason had opted out of the hunt. Having lost his wife Ilara to a construction accident during the colony's 2nd year, he preferred keeping to himself, tending his modest farm with only the colony's quarterly supply drops and monthly town meetings to connect him to the larger community. That morning, though, as he repaired a section of fencing damaged by the previous night's storm, he heard a sound that would change everything. A weak, high-pitched squeal coming from a dried-up irrigation ditch near his property line. Approaching cautiously, Mason peered over the edge. There, squirming helplessly in the mud, was the smallest razorback he'd ever seen, barely the size of a Terran house cat. Its exoskeleton hadn't fully hardened yet, revealing patches of soft, pinkish skin underneath. 2 of its 6 legs appeared malformed. "Well, aren't you an ugly little thing?" Mason murmured, kneeling for a closer look. The creature responded with another pathetic squeal, struggling to right itself in the mud. Mason wasn't a sentimental man. Living on the frontier of human civilization had hardened him. The colony's policy on razorbacks was clear: eradicate on sight. This runt, with its deformities, had clearly been abandoned by its herd natural selection at work. The kindest thing would be to put it out of its misery. He reached for his utility knife. The creature locked eyes with him. Its eyes, strangely intelligent, were an iridescent blue, unlike any razorback he'd seen in colonial warning bulletins. Something about those eyes reminded him of Ilara, who had always been the one to rescue injured wildlife back on Earth. "Damn it all," Mason sighed, returning the knife to its sheath. Instead, he reached down and carefully lifted the alien creature. It was surprisingly heavy for its size, and let out a startled grunt as he wrapped it in his jacket. "Don't make me regret this," he told it sternly as he carried it back toward his homestead. "And don't think for a second I'm keeping you. Just getting you strong enough to survive on your own." The homestead was modest by colonial standards, a prefabricated main structure, supplemented by extensions Mason had built using local timber and stone. It sat on a low rise, overlooking 5 hectares of cultivated fields and a small orchard of earth apple trees specially engineered to thrive in Proxima B's reddish sunlight. Mason brought the creature into his workshop attached to the barn and created a makeshift pen using spare fencing materials. He cleaned the mud from its body, revealing more of the unusual blue patterns running across its hide. The creature was indeed a razorback, but something about it seemed different from the others described in colonial reports. "You need a name," Mason decided, watching it investigate its new surroundings. "How about Goliath? Seems fitting given how tiny you are and now a bit of irony never hurt anyone." Feeding the creature proved challenging. Mason tried various combinations of colony-grown feed until discovering that Goliath had a particular appetite for the fibrous pulp of the native purple ferns that grew along the property's eastern boundary. Within days, a routine developed. Mason would work his fields during the day, returning periodically to check on Goliath, who grew noticeably stronger each day. By the end of the first week, the creature was standing steadily on all 6 legs even. The previously malformed one seemed to be straightening with proper nutrition. By the end of the second week, Goliath had doubled in size and had developed a habit of following Mason around the workshop like a puppy. "This isn't sustainable," Mason told Goliath one evening as he fed him. "You're growing too fast, and eventually, someone from the colony will notice. They'll want to put you down." Goliath responded by headbutting Mason's hand affectionately, his tusks still small but definitely developing gleaming in the workshop's lights. Mason knew he should inform the colonial authorities. The bounty on razorbacks would supplement his income nicely, and there was always the risk that Goliath's natural instincts would eventually surface. But each day, he found another reason to postpone the call. "Tomorrow," he promised himself daily. "I'll call them tomorrow." Tomorrow never came. A month passed, and Goliath was now the size of a large dog. His exoskeleton had fully hardened into segmented plates of deep indigo blue with swirling patterns that seemed to shift in different lighting. His 6 tusks, 3 on each side of his snout, had grown to impressive proportions. Most remarkably, his intelligence continued to astound Mason. Goliath quickly learned to respond to various verbal commands. He could move objets from one place to another when directed, and seemed to understand when Mason was upset or content. He'd even taken to sleeping at the foot of Mason's bed, though his increasing size was making this arrangement problematic. Mason began constructing a proper shelter for Goliath outside the barn, far enough from the main road that passing vehicles wouldn't spot the creature. As he worked, he talked to Goliath about his life about Earth, about the colony's founding, about Ilara. It was therapeutic in a way that surprised him. He hadn't spoken this much in years. "Ilara would have loved you," Mason told Goliath as he hammered together the frame for the new shelter. "She always had a soft spot for odd creatures. Probably why she married me," Goliath grunted, using his snout to nudge a fallen hammer back toward Mason. "Thanks, big guy," Mason said, accepting the tool. "You know, for a supposedly mindless destructive pest, you're pretty helpful." The first real test of their unusual partnership came when Lars Hendricks, Mason's nearest neighbor at 3 kilometers away, made an unexpected visit. Mason had barely a minute's warning when he spotted Lars's utility vehicle kicking up dust on the access road. "Goliath, hide!" Mason hissed urgently, pointing toward the back of the barn. Remarkably, the creature understood, lumbering quickly behind the structure just as Lars's vehicle pulled up. "Wilson! Been too long," Lars called as he stepped out. A burly man with a perpetual sunburn, Lars managed one of the colony's larger agricultural operations. "Missed you at the town meeting last week." "Been busy," Mason replied, wiping his hands on his pants. "Crop rotation season." Lars nodded knowingly. "Same all over. Listen, I'm here about the razorback problem. Defense Force got most of the herd, but some stragglers escaped. Everyone's been asked to report sightings immediately." Mason nodded, keeping his expression neutral. "Haven't seen any around here, but I'll keep watch." Good, Lars said, then hesitated. "Actually, there was something else. The council's concerned about you, Mason. Living out here alone, since Ilara? Well, it's not healthy. Jensen's daughter is running a social for unattached colonists next month. You should come." Mason forced a smile. "I'll think about it." After extracting a half-hearted promise that Mason would at least consider attending the social, Lars departed, much to Mason's relief. As the dust from Lars's vehicle faded in the distance, Goliath emerged from his hiding place, looking almost proud of himself. "Good job," Mason told him, scratching between his armored plates where he'd discovered Goliath particularly enjoyed it. "But this was too close. We need to be more careful." That night, lying in bed with Goliath, now too large to join him but still insisting on sleeping nearby on the floor, Mason confronted the reality of his situation. He was harboring what the colony considered a dangerous pest. Worse, he had grown attached to the creature. What had started as a temporary rescue had evolved into something deeper, a companionship that filled some of the void Alara's death had left. "What am I going to do with you?" Mason whispered in the darkness. Goliath's rhythmic breathing was his only answer. The next few months established a new normal. Goliath continued to grow at an alarming rate, now standing as tall as Mason's shoulder. His intelligence grew along with his body. He learned to open doors, recognize dozens of objects by name, and even assist with simple farm tasks. Mason constructed an expanded shelter that connected to the barn via a secret passage, allowing Goliath to move between spaces without being seen from the road. Mason's isolated lifestyle proved advantageous. Few visitors meant few opportunities for discovery. When necessary, Goliath demonstrated an uncanny ability to remain hidden, sometimes for hours, until the coast was clear. As time passed, Mason noticed other unique aspects of Goliath's development. Unlike reports of wild razorbacks, Goliath showed no aggression toward Mason's livestock. In fact, he displayed protective behavior toward the farm animals, once alerting Mason to a flock of native avian predators attacking his chicken coop. Another unusual trait was Goliath's reaction to electronics. He seemed fascinated by Mason's tablet and communication devices, watching intently whenever Mason used them. When Mason repaired farm equipment, Goliath observed with focused attention, sometimes retrieving tools before Mason asked for them. "You're something special, aren't you?" Mason remarked one evening as they sat on the porch, Goliath now too large to fit inside the house comfortably. "Not just a razorback. Something different." Goliath rumbled contentedly, his massive head resting near Mason's chair. The peaceful routine was shattered 6 months after Mason found Goliath. A colony-wide alert blared from Mason's communication console. An emergency town meeting had been called. All colonists were required to attend. "Stay hidden," Mason instructed Goliath firmly before departing. "No matter what. I'll be back soon." The colony's main settlement was bustling with activity when Mason arrived. The central meeting hall, a large dome-shaped structure that served as Hope's Landing's administrative center, was packed with anxious colonists. Mason found a seat near the back, nodding briefly to acquaintances, but avoiding conversation. Governor Chen, a stern woman who had led the colony since its founding, took the stage. Her expression was grave. "Citizens of Hope's Landing," she began, her amplified voice instantly silencing the murmurs. "I've called this emergency session to address a critical security situation. Our long-range sensors have detected an unidentified spacecraft approaching Proxima Centauri." A collective gasp swept through the room. In 7 years, no vessel other than scheduled supply ships from Earth had ever approached their system. "The vessel does not match any Earth Alliance configuration," Governor Chen continued. "It has not responded to hails. It will reach orbit in approximately 3 standard days." The meeting devolved into chaos as colonists shouted questions and concerns. Mason sat quietly, his mind racing. An alien ship. First contact. The implications were staggering. When order was finally restored, Governor Chen outlined emergency preparations. Defense forces would be mobilized. Non-essential personnel would shelter in designated bunkers. All colonists were instructed to prepare emergency supplies and await further instructions. As the meeting adjourned, Mason hurried back to his vehicle. His isolation suddenly seemed like a liability rather than an advantage. If there was trouble, he was kilometers from help. And then there was Goliath. When Mason returned home, he found evidence of distress. Goliath had knocked over several storage containers and paced anxiously in his shelter. Upon seeing Mason, the creature rushed forward, making agitated grunting sounds. "Easy, big guy," Mason soothed, placing a hand on Goliath's armored head. "What's got you so worked up?" That night, Goliath refused to sleep, instead positioning himself near the homestead's main window, staring up at the stars. Mason observed this unusual behavior with growing unease. Could Goliath somehow sense the approaching vessel? Did he have some connection to whatever was coming? The next day, while working in his fields, Mason spotted a Colonial Defense Force vehicle approaching. He quickly directed Goliath to hide, then waited as two uniformed officers pulled up. "Citizen Wilson," the senior officer greeted him. "We're conducting a survey of outlying properties in preparation for potential emergency measures." "I heard at the meeting," Mason replied. "What can I do for you?" The officers explained they were documenting resources and vulnerabilities at each homestead. They took inventory of Mason's supplies, noted his water and power systems, and mapped the property's layout. Throughout their visit, Mason was acutely aware of Goliath hidden just meters away behind the workshop. As they were preparing to leave, the junior Crow officer paused, looking toward the barn. "Have you noticed any unusual animal activity recently, citizen? Specifically razorbacks?" Mason's heart raced, but he kept his expression neutral. "None recently. The hunt a few months back seems to have scattered them." The officer nodded, seemingly satisfied. "If you do see any, eliminate them immediately and report it. We can't afford any additional complications right now." After they departed, Mason released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He found Goliath crouched uncomfortably in a storage cellar, the space barely containing his massive frame. That was too close, Mason told him, patting his flank as the creature emerged. "And things are going to get more complicated before they get better." That evening, Mason accessed the colony's information network on his tablet, searching for any updates about the approaching vessel. The official reports remained vague, trajectory consistent with deliberate approach, size indicating a medium transport or small warship. No response to communications attempts. Unofficial channels told a different story. Colonial communications specialists had reportedly detected encrypted transmissions from the vessel. Some claimed the ship's design appeared similar to artifacts discovered in abandoned ruins on Proxima B's southern continent, ruins the colonial government had kept largely quiet about, but which had sparked rumors of previous alien visitors. As Mason scrolled through these reports, Goliath pressed against his side, eyes fixed on the tablet's screen. When a grainy image of the approaching ship appeared, captured by the colony's orbital telescope, Goliath made a low rumbling sound unlike anything Mason had heard from him before. "You recognize this, don't you?" Mason asked quietly, studying Goliath's reaction. "Somehow, you know what's coming." The following day, the emergency became immediate. The alien vessel had accelerated, drastically reducing its arrival time. Governor Chen issued colony-wide instructions. All citizens were to either report to central bunkers or secure their properties and prepare for potential hostile action. Mason faced an impossible choice. Abandoning the homestead meant leaving Goliath vulnerable. Taking Goliath to the settlement would likely result in the creature being shot on sight or worse, experimented on if his unusual intelligence was discovered. Staying meant facing unknown dangers alone. In the end, there was no real choice. Mason couldn't abandon Goliath. "We'll ride this out together," he told the creature as he fortified the homestead's windows and doors. "Whatever's coming, we'll face it here." Goliath seemed to understand, helping in his own way by moving heavy objects when directed and remaining vigilantly near Mason throughout the preparations. Night fell, and with it came the news that the alien vessel had achieved orbit around Proxima b. Colony-wide communications switched to emergency protocols, with scheduled updates every hour. Mason and Goliath sat together on the porch, watching the stars. "There," Mason said suddenly, pointing to a moving light crossing the sky. "That must be them." Goliath rose to his full height now, nearly 8 feet tall at the shoulder end, released a low, resonant call that seemed to vibrate the air itself. Mason had never heard him make such a sound before. "What is it? What are you trying to tell me?" Before Mason could contemplate further, all communications from the colony abruptly ceased. His tablet displayed only an emergency signal, contact lost with Central Command. Then the sky lit up. From their elevated position on the homestead's porch, Mason and Goliath watched as multiple smaller lights detached from the orbiting vessel and descended toward the main settlement. "They're landing," Mason whispered, dread pooling in his stomach. The night that followed was one of helpless waiting. Without communications, Mason could only guess at what was happening at the settlement kilometers away. Occasionally, bright flashes illuminated the distant horizon. Weapons fire or explosions, he couldn't be sure. Goliath grew increasingly agitated as the night progressed. He paced restlessly, making those strange resonant calls periodically. Several times he tried to leave the homestead, only stopping when Mason firmly commanded him to stay. "We don't know what's happening," Mason told him, though he wondered if perhaps Goliath knew more than he did. "If the colony's under attack, rushing in blindly won't help anyone." Dawn brought smoke rising from the direction of Hope's Landing. Mason's attempts to restore communications failed. Either the colony's communication array was down, or something was blocking signals. Making a difficult decision, Mason prepared his old-fashioned projectile rifle, a family heirloom he'd brought from Earth, mostly for sentimental reasons, and his utility vehicle. "I need to see what's happening," he told Goliath. "You have to stay here. Stay hidden." Goliath blocked the doorway, his massive frame preventing Mason from leaving. "Move aside," Mason ordered firmly. "I need to check on our neighbors." Goliath refused to budge, instead making a series of grunts and rumbles that almost sounded like language. After several frustrated attempts to leave, Mason relented. "Fine. But if you're coming with me, you need to understand how dangerous this is. If these aliens are hostile, they might see you as a threat. If our people are still in charge, they'll definitely see you as a threat." Goliath's only response was to move toward the utility vehicle expectantly. "I can't believe I'm doing this," Mason muttered as he reconfigured the vehicle's rear compartment to accommodate Goliath's bulk. "Stay down and stay quiet. If I tell you to run, you run. Understand?" Goliath rumbled affirmatively as he squeezed into the vehicle. The journey toward Hope's Landing revealed a landscape transformed. Scorch marks scarred the earth where energy weapons had struck. Debris both from colonial structures and unfamiliar metallic components littered the road. Most ominously, they passed several abandoned vehicles, some showing signs of battle damage. As they approached the colony's agricultural outskirts, Mason slowed the vehicle, proceeding with caution. The smell of smoke grew stronger. When they crested a hill overlooking the settlement, Mason stopped and stared in horror. Hope's Landing was under occupation. Several sleek metallic structures, clearly not of human design, had been erected in the colony's central plaza. Strange hovering machines patrolled the perimeter. Most disturbing were the alien beings directing these operations, tall, slender humanoids with elongated limbs and reflective exoskeletons that resembled insect carapaces. "Sweet Earth," Mason whispered, raising binoculars for a closer look. "It's an invasion." From their vantage point, he could see colonists being herded into groups. Some appeared to be injured. The colonial defense force had clearly been overwhelmed there. Vehicles lay destroyed throughout the settlement. Beside him, Goliath released a low growl. The creature's body had gone rigid, his eyes fixed on the alien beings below. But Mason couldn't tell if the reaction was fear, anger, or recognition. "We need more information," Mason decided. "And we need help." He drove away from the settlement, taking a circuitous route toward Lars's Hendricks farm. If anyone in the area would have fought back, it would be Lars, a former Earth Alliance Marine before becoming a colonist. Lars's farm appeared intact as they approached, but Mason proceeded cautiously, hiding the vehicle in a grove of native vegetation before continuing on foot. He ordered Goliath to remain hidden while he investigated. The farmhouse was dark. Mason approached slowly, rifle ready. "Lars?" he called out softly, reaching the porch. "It's Mason Wilson. Are you there?" A sudden movement from inside was his only warning before the door cracked open, revealing Lars's haggard face and the barrel of a pulse rifle. "Wilson?" Lars lowered the weapon slightly. "Thank God it's you. Get inside, quickly." Mason slipped in, and Lars immediately resealed the door, engaging multiple makeshift locks. "They're everywhere," Lars said without preamble, his voice hoarse. "Came down in those dropships last night. Our defense force didn't stand a chance. Their shields absorbed our energy weapons like they were nothing. Conventional projectiles work better, but they adapted quickly. What do they want? Mason asked, accepting the water Lars offered him. Resources, territory, who knows? They're rounding up colonists, separating them into groups. Some are being put to work extending their landing zone. Others are being taken into their ships. They've got those walking machines patrolling between homesteads, capturing anyone they find. Lars led Mason to a window, pointing to a distant field, where one of the alien machines could be seen, a three-legged construct with a central body that housed weapons and sensors. They have some sort of neural disruptor, Lars continued. Paralyzes you instantly. Roberts and his family tried fighting back. I watched through my scope as those things just shut them down, carried them off still conscious but unable to move. Have you contacted anyone else? The other outlying farms? Lars shook his head grimly. Communications are being jammed. I've tried reaching the emergency bunkers, but nothing gets through. We're on our own, Wilson. Mason processed this information, his mind racing. There must be resistance forming somewhere. Not everyone could have been captured. If there is, I haven't found it, Lars replied. I was planning to head for the eastern caves after dark. Some of the miners might have taken refuge there. Their planning was interrupted by a mechanical whirring sound growing closer. Lars tensed, grabbing his rifle. One of their scouts, he whispered urgently. Get down! They crouched below the window as the alien machine passed nearby, its searchlight sweeping across the property. When the beam crossed the window, both men held their breath. The light lingered for a moment before continuing on. They waited in tense silence until the whirring faded into the distance. That was too close, Lars exhaled. They come by every few hours, getting bolder each time. Mason knew he needed to return to Goliath soon. The creature would grow anxious, possibly revealing himself if Mason stayed away too long. I should go, he said. My vehicle is hidden nearby. I came to check if you needed help. Lars looked surprised, then grateful. Actually, I could use a ride to the eastern sector if you're offering. Better chance of finding others if we travel together. Mason hesitated. Taking Lars meant revealing Goliath, a complication he wasn't prepared for. Let me check if the way is clear first. I'll come back for you once I know it's safe. Before Lars could object, a deafening crash came from outside, followed by the distinctive sound of energy weapons discharging. Both men rushed to different windows. What Mason saw made his blood run cold. One of the alien tripod machines had returned, accompanied by two of the insectoid aliens. They were methodically approaching the house, weapons ready. Back door, now! Lars hissed, grabbing a bag he'd evidently prepared for escape. They rushed through the house toward the rear exit, but as Lars pulled the door open, they were met with the glowing weapon port of another tripod machine. Down! Mason shouted, tackling Lars as an energy pulse sizzled through the space where they'd been standing. Scrambling backward, they retreated deeper into the house as mechanical appendages began tearing through the walls and roof. The structure groaned under the assault. The cellar, Lars gasped, pulling aside a rug to reveal a trapdoor. It connects to an irrigation tunnel. We might be able to. The ceiling collapsed inward, debris crashing down as a mechanical limb punched through. Lars shoved Mason toward the trapdoor. Go! I'll hold them off! Mason didn't have time to argue. He dropped into the cellar as Lars opened fire on the invaders, his conventional rifle creating satisfying dents in the alien machinery. The last Mason saw was Lars dodging energy pulses as he provided covering fire. The dark tunnel was cramped and smelled of damp earth. Mason crawled frantically, guided only by the dim light of his personal communicator. Behind him, the sounds of destruction grew fainter, replaced by an ominous mechanical whirring that suggested pursuit. The tunnel extended for nearly 100 meters before opening into a drainage ditch. Mason emerged cautiously, finding himself in a field of native blue ferns about half a kilometer from where he'd left Goliath. Moving in a low crouch, using the vegetation for cover, Mason made his way back toward his hidden vehicle. His mind raced with terrible possibilities. If the aliens had found Lars's farm, they might have discovered his vehicle to Goliath with it. As he approached the grove where he'd hidden the vehicle, Mason heard the distinctive sounds of conflict energy weapons, mechanical movement, and something else, the enraged roar of a razorback. Breaking into a run, Mason burst into the clearing to find a scene of chaos. His vehicle lay overturned. One alien tripod had been completely destroyed, its components scattered across the ground. Another was locked in combat with Goliath, who had grown even larger since Mason had found him. Now standing nearly 10 feet tall at the shoulder, his armored hide deflecting energy blasts as he charged repeatedly into the machine. Most surprisingly, the insectoid aliens themselves seemed shocked by Goliath's presence. Two of them were frantically communicating via handheld devices while maintaining distance from the battle. Mason raised his rifle, taking careful aim at one of the distracted aliens. The projectile struck true, penetrating the being's exoskeleton. It collapsed with a high-pitched keening sound that alerted its companion. The second alien turned toward Mason, raising its weapon. Before it could fire, Goliath somehow sensed the threat and pivoted with surprising speed for his size. With a powerful charge, he impaled the alien on his tusks, lifting the creature completely off the ground before shaking it violently and discarding the broken form. The remaining tripod retreated several meters, recalibrating its weapons. This gave Goliath enough time to rush to Mason's side, positioning his massive body as a shield between Mason and the machine. "Good to see you too, big guy," Mason panted, patting Goliath's flank. "But we're still in trouble here." The tripod advanced again, firing a concentrated energy beam that struck Goliath directly. The creature roared in pain, but held his ground, the beam leaving a scorched mark across his armored plates. Mason fired several shots at the tripod's central housing, creating small breaches in its armor. The machine responded by charging a larger weapon that began to emit an ominous humming sound. "Move!" Mason shouted, pushing against Goliath's side. Instead of retreating, Goliath surged forward with devastating force. He slammed into the tripod before its weapon could discharge, his tusks finding purchase in the breaches Mason's shots had created. With a strength that seemed impossible even for his size, Goliath lifted the entire machine and smashed it repeatedly against the ground until it ceased functioning. In the sudden silence that followed, Mason approached Goliath cautiously. The creature was breathing heavily, blood seeping from several wounds where the energy weapons had penetrated his armor. "You saved my life," Mason said quietly, examining the injuries. "But we need to get you somewhere safe to treat these wounds." Goliath rumbled softly, nudging Mason's hand with his snout in a familiar gesture of affection. "My vehicle's destroyed," Mason observed, looking at the overturned transport. "We'll have to continue on foot." As night fell, they made their way eastward, avoiding open areas and using the increasing density of native vegetation for cover. Mason treated Goliath's wounds as best he could with the limited medical supplies he carried, applying antibacterial sealant to the worst burns and cuts. They encountered two more tripod scouts during their journey, but managed to avoid detection by remaining motionless in dense underbrush as the machines passed. Goliath displayed remarkable discipline, freezing in place despite his injuries when Mason signaled danger. Near midnight, they reached the foothills that marked the beginning of the eastern mining territory. The terrain became rockier, dotted with cave entrances and abandoned equipment from the colony's mineral extraction operations. "If there are survivors gathering anywhere, it would be here," Mason told Goliath as they took shelter in a shallow cave. "But I don't know how I'll explain you to them." Goliath had grown too exhausted to continue without rest. His massive frame shuddered periodically as he lay on the cave floor, his injuries clearly causing significant pain despite his stoic behavior. Mason kept watch through the night, treating Goliath's wounds periodically and listening for approaching threats. As dawn approached, he was startled by movement at the cave entrance, a human figure silhouetted against the lightening sky. Mason raised his rifle instinctively. "Easy there," a familiar voice said. "It's Lars." Mason lowered his weapon in shock as Lars Hendricks stepped into the cave, battered and bloodied, but very much alive. Lars's eyes widened as he took in the enormous form of Goliath. "What in God's name is that?" "It's complicated," Mason replied, stepping protectively in front of the resting creature. "He's with me. He saved my life back there." Lars considered this, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Is that a razorback? The ones we've been hunting?" "Something like that," Mason admitted. "But different, intelligent, and apparently, he hates our new visitors as much as we do." After a tense moment, Lars nodded slowly. "Well, the way things are going, we need all the help we can get, even from oversized space boars." He explained how he'd escaped through a different tunnel after providing a distraction, then tracked Mason eastward, following signs of their passage. "There's a resistance gathering in the main mining complex," Lars continued. "About 30 colonists so far, including some Defense Force personnel. They've been collecting weapons and planning counterstrikes." "Have they had any success?" Mason asked hopefully. Lars's expression darkened. "Limited. The aliens have technology far beyond ours. Conventional weapons can damage their machines, but they adapt quickly. And for every one we destroy, 3 more seem to appear." As they spoke, Goliath stirred, rising to his feet with visible effort. He regarded Lars warily, positioning himself slightly between the newcomer and Mason. "It's okay," Mason assured him. "Lars is a friend." Lars stared in fascination as Goliath processed these words, then visibly relaxed his posture. "Remarkable," Lars murmured. "You weren't exaggerating about its intelligence." "His intelligence," Mason corrected automatically. "And you haven't seen anything yet." They rested through the morning before continuing toward the mining complex. Lars led the way, having memorized patrol patterns from his earlier approach. Goliath followed behind, moving with surprising stealth despite his size and injuries. By mid-afternoon, they reached the camouflaged entrance to the main mine service tunnel, hidden behind a rockfall that had been carefully arranged to appear natural while allowing passage. A guard stopped them immediately, weapon raised. When he saw Goliath, he nearly fired before Lars intervened. "They're with me," Lars said firmly. "And that creature is on our side. I've seen it destroy the invaders' machines with my own eyes." Several tense moments passed before the guard lowered his weapon reluctantly. "Command will need to approve this," he muttered, activating his communicator. "Especially that thing." They were escorted through winding tunnels reinforced with colony-grade support beams. Signs of hasty fortification were everywhere: improvised barricades, sensor arrays cobbled together from mining equipment, and stockpiles of weapons. Colonists stared openly as they passed, particularly at Goliath, who stayed close to Mason, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. The command center, such as it was, had been established in a large cavern once used for equipment maintenance. Portable lights illuminated workstations where colonists monitored sensor readings and communicated via a closed network. In the center, around a holographic projection table, stood several figures. Mason recognized Captain Reyes of the Colonial Defense Force, Dr. Eliza Chen Brass, the governor's daughter and colony's lead xenobiologist, and somewhat surprisingly, Governor Chen herself. The governor's face registered shock when she saw Goliath. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded. "Why have you brought a razorback into our sanctuary?" "Ma'am," Lars stepped forward. "This creature fought against the invaders. It destroyed 2 of their tripods and killed several of the aliens themselves." This declaration caused a stir among those present. Captain Reyes approached cautiously, studying Goliath with professional interest. "That's impossible," he said. "These creatures are nothing but pests, mindless destroyers." "This one's different," Mason finally spoke up. "I've raised him since he was abandoned as a runt. He's intelligent, capable of understanding complex commands, and he seems to have some connection to the invaders." Dr. Chen moved closer, her scientific curiosity evidently overcoming her initial fear. "Connection? What kind of connection?" "He knew they were coming," Mason explained. "Before the attack, he was agitated, trying to warn me. And the invaders, they seemed surprised by him, almost afraid." The governor's eyes narrowed. "How long have you harbored this creature, Wilson?" Mason swallowed hard. "About a year, ma'am. In direct violation of colonial edict," she noted coldly. "With respect, Governor," Lars interrupted, "we're facing extinction here. If this razorback can help us fight back, does it matter how long Wilson's had it?" A tense silence followed before Captain Reyes broke it. "He's right. We need every advantage we can get." He turned to Mason. "What do you call it?" "Goliath," Mason replied. "His name is Goliath." Dr. Chen had been circling Goliath, careful to maintain a safe distance but clearly fascinated. The coloration is unlike any specimen we've documented, and the size. She looked to Mason. May I examine him? Properly, with equipment? Mason glanced at Goliath, who was watching the proceedings with evident intelligence. That's up to him. But his wounds need treatment first. Governor Chen made a decision. Dr. Chen, see to the creature's injuries and conduct whatever examination it will permit. Captain Reyes, debrief these men on everything they've seen of the invaders' capabilities. She fixed Mason with a stern look. This doesn't mean you're absolved of violating colonial law, Wilson. But that's a matter for after our survival is secured. The next few hours were a flurry of activity. Goliath, initially resistant to examination, eventually allowed Dr. Chen to treat his injuries after Mason's reassurance. The wounds were severe, but healing at a remarkable rate, another anomaly that fascinated the xenobiologist. Meanwhile, Mason and Lars provided detailed accounts of their encounters with the aliens, including the effectiveness of projectile weapons versus energy-based colonial arms. Maps were updated with patrol routes they'd observed, and engineers began designing modifications to existing weapons based on their reports. They're methodical, Captain Reyes noted, as they reviewed the information. Expanding outward from the settlement in controlled increments, securing territory before moving on. What are they after? Mason asked. Dr. Chen joined them, wiping her hands on a cloth after finishing Goliath's treatment. Based on their behavior and the equipment they've deployed, we believe they're preparing for long-term occupation. They're particularly interested in our agricultural areas and water processing facilities. Colonists, just like us, Governor Chen added grimly. Except they don't seem interested in coexistence. What about the people they've captured? Lars asked. Captain Reyes' expression darkened. We've managed to rescue a few. From what they've told us, the invaders are separating colonists based on some criteria we don't understand yet. Some are put to work. Others, he hesitated. Others are being subjected to some kind of biological sampling, tissue collection, blood work. They're studying us, Dr. Chen concluded, perhaps determining our compatibility with their biological needs. The implications hung heavily in the air. How many of us are left? Mason asked. Out of 812 colonists, Governor Chen replied, we've accounted for approximately 300. About 100 are here in the mining complex. The rest are either in smaller resistance pockets or in hiding. And our chances? And Lars pressed. Captain Reyes didn't sugarcoat it. Not good. We've destroyed maybe a dozen of their machines and killed a handful of their troops. But they have air superiority, advanced weaponry, and systematic tactics. We can harry them, delay them, but without outside help. Earth is 2 light-years away, Governor Chen reminded them. Even if our distress signal got through before they took out our communications array, help would be years in coming. As the strategic discussion continued, Dr. Chen pulled Mason aside. There's something you need to see, she said quietly, leading him to a makeshift laboratory where Goliath was resting on a reinforced platform. What is it? Mason asked, checking on Goliath, who rumbled contentedly at his approach. Dr. Chen activated a holographic display. I took cellular samples while treating his wounds. Look at this genetic structure. The display showed complex molecular chains that meant little to Mason. I'm not a scientist, Doctor. The razorbacks we studied previously have a genetic structure completely alien to Earth life, she explained. But Goliath. She manipulated the display, splitting it to show a comparison. His DNA has been modified extensively. There are sequences here that appear almost engineered. Mason looked at Goliath with new eyes. You're saying he was created? Designed? I'm saying he's not a natural evolution, Dr. Chen replied. Something or someone altered what would have been a normal razorback. And here's the most interesting part. She highlighted a section of the genetic map. This sequence bears remarkable similarity to samples we recovered from the ruins in the southern continent. The ruins that the colonial government keeps quiet about, Mason noted. Dr. Chen nodded. The same ruins that some believe were left by the same species that's currently invading us. She looked at Goliath with scientific wonder. Your friend here might be the key to understanding who they are and what they want." As if understanding he was being discussed, Goliath rose to his feet, now towering over both humans. His wounds were already showing signs of healing, the burned areas forming new skin at an accelerated rate. "He's ready for more tests?" Mason asked. Dr. Chen shook her head. "Actually, I was hoping for something else. If he's as intelligent as you claim, and if he has some connection to the invaders, perhaps he can tell us something about them." "He doesn't speak," Mason pointed out. "Not in our language," Dr. Chen agreed. "But communication takes many forms." Over the next day, Dr. Chen worked with Mason to establish a rudimentary communication system with Goliath. Using tablets displaying images and simple symbols, they confirmed what Mason had long suspected Goliath could understand: abstract concepts, make logical connections, and express preferences. His intelligence was clearly far beyond that of any Earth animal. More remarkably, when shown images of the invaders and their technology, Goliath displayed clear recognition and agitation. Through a painstaking process of elimination using different symbols, they established that Goliath identified the invaders as wrong makers, the closest translation they could manage, and indicated they had visited Proxima B before, long ago. "He's trying to tell us they've been here before," Dr. Chen explained to the command group. "And something went wrong. Perhaps an experiment or a colonization attempt that failed." "And the Razorbacks?" Captain Reyes asked. "Where do they fit in?" "Based on Goliath's responses, we believe the Razorbacks might have been engineered by the invaders as a biological tool, perhaps for terraforming or defense, then abandoned when they left." "Why?" "So, they're coming back to reclaim their creation," Governor Chen concluded. "And finding us here instead." The discussion was interrupted by an alarm. Sensors had detected a large formation of alien craft approaching the mountains. The mining complex had been discovered. "Battle stations," Captain Reyes ordered. "Evacuation Protocol Alpha." Chaos erupted as colonists rushed to defensive positions or began gathering essential supplies for evacuation. Mason found himself at Goliath's side, uncertain what to do. The creature seemed agitated but focused, watching the activity with intelligent eyes. Dr. Chen approached them hurriedly. "The secondary exit tunnels can't accommodate Goliath's size," she explained. "He'll need to use the main entrance. That's where the attack will focus," Mason realized. "Precisely," Dr. Chen replied grimly. "But we've learned enough about their methods to know they'll send ground forces in after the initial bombardment. If Goliath can delay them, it could give the evacuation time to succeed." Mason looked at Goliath, understanding the implication. "You're asking him to be a sacrifice." Dr. Chen's expression softened. "I'm asking if your friend is willing to fight for his home, just as you are." Mason didn't need to translate this question for Goliath. The creature had already begun moving toward the main entrance, his massive frame dwarfing the colonists rushing past in the opposite direction. "I'm going with him," Mason decided. "That's suicide," Lars said, appearing beside them with a cache of weapons. "But I figured you'd say that. So, I'm coming too." They assembled a small strike team: Mason, Lars, and 4 Colonial Defense Force soldiers armed with modified projectile weapons designed to penetrate the aliens' armor. Their mission was simple but deadly: hold the entrance long enough for the evacuation to proceed. As they took up positions near the concealed entrance, the first impacts shook the mountain. Alien energy weapons struck with precision, targeting sensor arrays and defense installations. Dust and debris rained down as the bombardment continued. "They're softening us up," Captain Reyes observed over the comm channel. "Expect ground forces in 3 minutes." Mason checked his weapon one last time, then looked at Goliath. "You don't have to do this," he said softly. "You could go deeper into the caves, hide until it's over." Goliath's response was to position himself at the front of their defensive line, his massive body providing cover for the humans behind him. His tusks gleamed in the emergency lighting, and his armored hide bore the scars of previous battles, now badges of honor. The bombardment ceased, leaving an eerie silence. Then came the mechanical whirring of approaching tripods. "Here they come," Lars whispered, raising his rifle. The first tripod appeared at the partially collapsed entrance, its sensors scanning the interior. Behind it came another, and another 6 in total. Following them were at least a dozen of the insectoid aliens, their armor gleaming with unfamiliar technology. "Hold," Captain Reyes ordered through the comm. "Let them advance into the kill zone." The strike team waited, barely breathing, as the alien force moved further into the entrance tunnel. When the last tripod had entered the confined space, Reyes gave the order, "Now." Explosive charges detonated above the tunnel, bringing down tons of rock that blocked the entrance behind the alien force, trapping them inside. Simultaneously, concealed colonists opened fire from multiple positions, their modified weapons penetrating alien armor with new effectiveness. The aliens responded with disciplined precision, their tripods deploying energy shields that protected their infantry. They returned fire, forcing the colonists into cover. All except Goliath. With a roar that shook dust from the ceiling, Goliath charged. The first tripod attempted to track him with its weapons, but his speed in the confined space was surprising. He slammed into the machine with such force that it toppled backward into the second tripod, creating momentary confusion in the alien ranks. Mason and the strike team used this opportunity to target exposed aliens, their projectile weapons finding vulnerable joints in the invaders' exoskeletons. 3 aliens fell before the others could establish a defensive position. The battle devolved into close-quarters combat, with Goliath at the center of the maelstrom. His tusks tore through alien machinery, his armored hide deflecting energy blasts that would have incinerated a human. The aliens focused their fire on him, apparently recognizing him as the primary threat. This diversion allowed Mason and the others to maneuver around the edges of the battle, picking off aliens and targeting tripod weak points. When a tripod's legs buckled from precision shots, Goliath would charge in to finish it off, displaying a tactical awareness that astonished even Captain Reyes. "The evacuation is 60% complete," Reyes reported over the comm. "Keep them occupied for 10 more minutes." "Easier said than done," Lars muttered, ducking behind a boulder as an energy blast superheated the air where he'd been standing. Mason watched in horror as one of the tripods activated a new weapon, a pulsing field that immobilized 2 of their Defense Force soldiers instantly. The aliens moved in to capture them, but Goliath intervened, somehow immune to the paralysis effect. He charged through the field, scattering the aliens and allowing Mason to drag the immobilized soldiers to safety. "He's protecting us," one of the rescued soldiers gasped when the paralysis effect wore off. "That creature is deliberately drawing their fire." Indeed, Goliath seemed to be implementing a strategy, isolating individual tripods, disabling their main weapons, then moving to the next while the strike team finished off the damaged machines. His movements displayed not just intelligence, but military thinking. As the battle progressed, the aliens changed tactics. Their remaining tripods formed a defensive circle, concentrating fire on Goliath. Energy blasts scored his hide, leaving smoking furrows across his armored plates. Yet he fought on, seemingly indefatigable despite the wounds. Then, something unexpected happened. One of the alien commanders activated a handheld device that emitted a complex series of tones. Goliath froze mid-charge, his head tilting as if listening. "What's happening?" Lars asked, reloading his weapon. "I don't know," Mason replied, concerned. "Some kind of control signal?" The alien commander advanced, still emitting the tones, which shifted in pattern and frequency. It addressed Goliath directly, gesturing with its free hand. Goliath remained motionless, his massive head lowered, as if considering the alien's communication. The battle paused as both sides watched this unexpected development. Then, with deliberate slowness, Goliath raised his head and emitted a responding sound. Not the roar of battle, but a complex sequence of tones that mimicked yet distinctly differed from the alien's signal. The alien commander stepped back, clearly surprised. It adjusted its device and sent another sequence. Goliath responded again, this time advancing a step. "They're communicating," Mason realized with shock. "Goliath is actually talking to them." "But whose side is he on?" Lars questioned, his weapon still trained on the aliens. For several tense moments, this bizarre exchange continued. Then, abruptly, the alien commander made a sharp gesture, The tripods resumed their attack with renewed intensity. Goliath's response was immediate and devastating. He charged not at the tripods, but directly at the commander, moving with shocking speed. Before the alien could retreat, Goliath's tusks impaled it, lifting the being high into the air. With a violent shake, he threw the commander's body against the nearest tripod, disrupting its targeting systems. "Evacuation complete," Reyes announced over the comm. "Fall back to secondary positions." The strike team began a fighting retreat, moving deeper into the tunnel network. Goliath covered their withdrawal, positioning his massive form to block alien pursuit. Energy weapons scorched his hide, but he stood firm, allowing the humans to escape. Mason paused at the junction where they would separate. "Goliath, come on!" he called. "We have to go." Goliath looked back at him, their eyes meeting in an instant of perfect understanding. Then the creature turned back to face the advancing aliens, lowering his head for another charge. "No!" Mason shouted, moving to return, but Lars grabbed him. "He's buying us time," Lars insisted, pulling Mason toward the escape route. "Don't waste it." The last Mason saw was Goliath charging into the remaining alien forces, tusks gleaming, roaring his defiance as the tunnel behind him began to collapse from strategically placed charges. The evacuation led them to a secondary complex, 5 kilometers away, a smaller mining operation connected to the main site by maintenance tunnels. Here, the surviving colonists regrouped, treating wounds and taking inventory of their dwindling supplies. "What was that communication between the alien and your Razorback?" Governor Chen demanded when Mason reported to command. "I don't know," Mason admitted, his voice hollow with grief for Goliath. "But whatever they said to him, he rejected it. He chose us." Dr. Chen was reviewing data on her tablet. "The audio recordings are fascinating. The patterns suggest a form of language, but with tonal qualities beyond human hearing range. Goliath's responses were similar but distinct, almost like an argument." "He sacrificed himself," Mason said quietly. "After everything the colony did hunting his kind, wanting him dead, he fought for us." Governor Chen's expression softened slightly. "Your creature showed more humanity than many humans I've known, Wilson. If we survive this, his actions won't be forgotten." But survival remained uncertain. Reports from their limited reconnaissance indicated the aliens were expanding their control, establishing a permanent base at the colony's center. More ships had arrived in orbit, suggesting reinforcements, or perhaps the beginning of a larger settlement effort. The resistance forces had shrunk to fewer than 200 able-bodied colonists, with supplies sufficient for only weeks, not the months or years that might be needed to outlast the invasion. Hope dwindled with each passing day. 3 days after the mining complex evacuation, Mason joined a small recon team checking the perimeter of their new hideout. They moved cautiously through the dense undergrowth of native vegetation that had reclaimed this area after mining operations ceased. "Movement ahead," the team leader whispered, signaling for everyone to take cover. Through his binoculars, Mason observed a patrol of alien tripods moving along the ridge above them. The machines moved with purpose, clearly searching for something or someone. "They're getting closer to finding us," Mason noted grimly. "Each patrol comes nearer to our position." As they watched, something unexpected happened. A distant rumbling grew steadily louder, causing even the tripods to pause and redirect their sensors. The ground began to vibrate beneath their feet. "Earthquake?" someone suggested. Mason felt a spark of hope he dared not name. "No. Something else." The rumbling crescendoed into a familiar roar one Mason had heard many times before, but never with such volume or intensity. The alien tripods turned toward the sound just as a massive shape burst from the tree line. Goliath, impossibly alive, significantly larger than before, and accompanied by a dozen other Razorbacks of varying sizes, crashed into the alien patrol with unstoppable momentum. The tripods didn't stand a chance, their legs buckling under the coordinated assault of multiple armored bodies. "He's alive," Mason breathed, watching in awe as Goliath directed the other Razorbacks with clear authority, using those same tonal communications they'd heard during the battle. "And he brought friends," the team leader added, equally astonished. They watched as the Razorback herd methodically destroyed the alien patrol, displaying tactical coordination that was undeniably intelligent. When the last tripod fell, Goliath raised his head and emitted a series of sounds that carried clearly across the distance. "He's calling for us," Mason realized. Without waiting for authorization, he stood and responded with a shout. "Goliath, here!" The great creature's head swiveled toward them, his iridescent blue eyes finding Mason immediately. With surprising gentleness for his enormous size, Goliath approached, the other razorbacks following at a respectful distance. Mason moved to meet him, ignoring the concerned calls of his team. When they came together, Goliath lowered his massive head, allowing Mason to place a hand on his snout, just as he had done countless times before. "I thought you were dead," Mason said softly. Goliath rumbled in response, then turned his head to indicate the other razorbacks. Through gestures and those strange tonal communications, he somehow conveyed a remarkable story. He had escaped the collapsing tunnel, severely wounded but alive. In his injured state, he had encountered a wild herd of razorbacks. Instead of attacking him, they had recognized something in him perhaps, his modified genetics, and accepted him as one of their own. More incredibly, they had followed his leadership. Back at the Resistance hideout, Goliath's return with his razorback herd caused both celebration and strategic recalculation. Dr. Chen was particularly fascinated by the social dynamics of the herd. "It's unprecedented," she explained during an emergency command meeting. "Wild razorbacks have never displayed this level of coordination or social structure, yet they follow Goliath's lead without question. Can they help us fight?" Captain Reyes asked practically. "They already are," Mason pointed out. "Goliath has been leading them in attacks against alien patrols for days. That's why he came looking for us, not just to reunite, but to coordinate our efforts." Governor Chen looked skeptical. "You're suggesting we form a military alliance with a herd of alien boars?" "I'm suggesting," Mason replied firmly, "that we embrace an unexpected advantage. The aliens clearly recognize Goliath as a threat. They tried to communicate with him, perhaps even control him. When that failed, they focused their attack on him above all other targets." Lars, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "The beasts can get close to the alien base without triggering the same alerts we do. They could be our way in." This observation led to intense planning sessions. Through their rudimentary communication system with Goliath, they pieced together crucial intelligence. The aliens had established their headquarters in the colony's central administrative building. The weaknesses in their perimeter security and their apparent vulnerability to coordinated physical attacks. Most importantly, they learned the invaders' primary objective. They sought to reclaim Proxima B, not just as a colony, but as a genetic laboratory. The razorbacks had indeed been their creation, part of a complex terraforming process abandoned centuries ago when some disaster forced their withdrawal. Now, they had returned to continue their work, with humanity seen as nothing more than an obstacle to be removed or, worse, raw material for further experimentation. A bold plan emerged. While the razorback herd launched a frontal assault on the alien headquarters, drawing their forces and attention, a small strike team would infiltrate the command center and deploy a modified mining explosive to destroy by their communication array. This would sever their connection to the orbiting ships and, hopefully, throw their ground forces into disarray. The plan was dangerous, with success far from guaranteed. But with supplies dwindling and alien patrols closing in on their hideout, options were limited. The night before the assault, Mason sat with Goliath under the stars, the massive creature now so large he had to remain outside the Resistance's cave system. "Tomorrow's going to be dangerous," Mason told him, leaning against his warm flank. "I wish I could make you understand exactly what we're asking you to do." Goliath rumbled softly, his tones conveying what words could not. Somehow, Mason knew the creature understood the stakes perfectly. He had chosen his side in this conflict, not with his creators, but with the humans who had shown him kindness. "Ilara would have been amazed by you," Mason said quietly. "She always saw the best in everything, even me." He patted Goliath's side affectionately. "Thank you for everything." Dawn broke clear and cold. The reddish light of Proxima Centauri illuminating a landscape transformed by conflict. The resistance forces moved into position, using the natural terrain for cover as they approached the colony settlement now controlled by the aliens. Goliath and his herd had circled wide, approaching from the opposite direction. The plan required precise timing. The Razorback assault needed to draw maximum attention before the human strike team attempted infiltration. Mason, along with Lars and 5 Colonial Defense Force specialists, comprised the strike team. They carried the experimental explosive device, designed by colony engineers to overload the aliens' communication systems with an electromagnetic pulse while physically destroying the array. "Strike team in position," Mason reported via the secure comm channel, awaiting the signal. Captain Reyes, coordinating from a hidden command post, confirmed. "Razorback forces in position, commencing Operation Thunderbird in 3, 2, 1. Mark." From their concealed position at the settlement's edge, Mason heard Goliath's distinctive roar, louder and more commanding than ever before. It was answered immediately by the chorus of his herd, creating a cacophony that echoed across the valley. Then came the unmistakable sounds of combat energy weapons discharging, mechanical components failing, alien communications growing frantic. "That's our cue," Lars said, leading the strike team forward. They moved swiftly through the settlement's outskirts, encountering minimal resistance as the aliens focused their defenses on the Razorback assault. The few tripods they encountered were quickly dispatched with their modified weapons, designed specifically to target the machine's weak points. As they approached the central administrative building, Mason caught glimpses of the main battle through gaps between structures. Goliath was magnificent, a living battering ram that smashed through alien defenses with unstoppable force. His herd followed his example, their coordinated attacks overwhelming the invaders' formations. For all their advanced technology, the aliens had no effective counter for the sheer physical power of the Razorbacks in close combat. The strike team reached the administrative building's rear entrance, finding it lightly guarded. 2 aliens fell to silent shots before they could raise an alarm. Using access codes provided by Governor Chen, they entered the structure once meant to house colony leadership. Inside, they found the aliens had transformed the building. Strange organic technology melded with human equipment, creating a hybrid command center. Alien communication devices pulsed with ethereal light, connected to what had once been the colony's main computer system. "Set the charges here," the team's demolition expert indicated, pointing to the central communication hub. "This will take out their entire command and control system." As they worked to place the explosive, Lars kept watch at the entrance. "We've got company," he warned suddenly. A lot of company. A squad of aliens had entered the building, evidently alerted to their presence. The strike team took defensive positions as energy weapons began firing down the corridor. "We need more time," the demolition expert called, still configuring the device. 3 minutes minimum." "We don't have 3 minutes," Lars replied grimly, returning fire. The aliens were advancing methodically, using portable shield generators to protect their approach. The strike team's ammunition was limited, and their position offered minimal cover. "I'll draw them off," Mason decided, checking his weapon. "Give you time to finish." "That's suicide," Lars objected. "Got a better idea?" Mason asked. Before Lars could respond, the building shook violently. The wall at the far end of the corridor collapsed inward, crushing several aliens beneath rubble. Through the dust and debris charged Goliath, his massive form somehow having forced its way into the structure. The remaining aliens redirected their fire toward this new threat, but Goliath was moving too quickly. He plowed through their formation, tusks impaling one alien while his massive hooves trampled another. The disruption gave the strike team the opening they needed to advance and secure the corridor. Mason approached Goliath, who was breathing heavily from exertion. "How did you know we needed help?" The creature couldn't answer with words, but the intelligence in his eyes spoke volumes. Somehow, he had sensed the danger and broken away from the main battle to come to their aid. "Charge is set," the demolition expert reported. "We have 2 minutes to clear the blast radius." "Everyone out, now," Lars ordered. They retreated the way they had come, Goliath following despite the tight confines of the human-sized corridors. As they exited the building, they encountered fresh alien resistance, a tripod blockading their escape route. "Take cover," Mason shouted as the machine powered up its main weapon. Goliath, however, did not hesitate. Despite the injuries he had sustained in the earlier fighting, he charged directly at the tripod. The machine fired, its energy beam striking Goliath squarely. The creature roared in pain, but did not falter, crashing into the tripod with such force that both were sent tumbling across the plaza. Mason and the strike team used this diversion to reach the designated extraction point just as the charges detonated. The administrative building imploded, a surge of electromagnetic energy visibly rippling outward. Across the settlement, alien technology sputtered and failed as the pulse disrupted their systems. "Command, this is Strike Team," Lars reported through the comm. "Mission accomplished. Requesting extraction." "Negative," came Captain Reyes' tense reply. "Plaza is still hot. Enemy reinforcements inbound from the north. Hold position." Mason's attention was fixed on Goliath, who was struggling to rise after his collision with the tripod. The machine lay destroyed nearby, but Goliath had not emerged unscathed. Severe burns covered his right flank, where the energy weapon had struck. One of his tusks had broken off near the base. Yet still he stood, positioning himself between the approaching alien reinforcements and the human strike team. "He's not going to make it," Mason realized aloud, anguish in his voice. "He's too badly hurt, and there are too many of them." As if hearing these words, Goliath turned his massive head toward Mason. Their eyes met across the distance, and some unspoken understanding passed between them. Goliath lowered his head in what almost looked like a nod, then turned to face the approaching enemy. What happened next would become legend in the colony's history. Goliath released a call unlike any heard before, no, a battle cry, but a summons. From all directions, his razorback herd responded, converging on the plaza. Dozens of them, then hundreds, emerged from side streets and alleyways. Not just the herd he had arrived with, but seemingly every razorback on Proxima B had answered his call. The alien reinforcements halted, clearly uncertain how to proceed against this unexpected development. Their hesitation gave the razorbacks the advantage they needed. With Goliath leading, despite his injuries, the herd charged. The ground trembled beneath Mason Wilson's feet as the massive creature charged forward, its 6 tusks gleaming in the morning light. Behind it, 3 war machines twice the size of houses crumpled like toys. The alien Boar, now 12 feet tall at the shoulder, let out a battle cry that shook the air itself. The invaders scattered in terror as Goliath, once a runt left to die, became the wall between humanity and extinction. "They're retreating!" someone shouted from the resistance positions. "They're actually retreating!" Mason watched in awe as the creature he bottle-fed all those years ago smashed through alien technology that had decimated their defense forces. No one was laughing now. The battle turned decisively. Without their central command and communication systems, the alien forces lost coordination. The razorback herd pressed this advantage, driving the invaders back toward their landing ships. Those that reached the ships managed to escape, launching hurriedly into orbit. Others were not so fortunate. By sunset, Hope's Landing had been reclaimed. The cost was high, nearly half the colony's population lost, infrastructure severely damaged, and the painful knowledge that hostile forces now knew their location. But they had survived, against all odds. Governor Chen established a provisional government in the settlement's intact structures. Captain Reyes organized recovery teams to search for survivors and salvage useful technology. Dr. Chen led efforts to understand the abandoned alien equipment, hoping to strengthen their defenses against future attacks. Mason Wilson found Goliath where the great creature had finally collapsed after the battle, near the colony's eastern gate. His wounds were severe, perhaps fatal. Mason sat beside him through the night, cleaning injuries where he could, offering water and comfort. "You've saved us all," Mason told him softly, stroking the massive head now resting on the ground. "Rest now. You've done more than enough." Goliath's breathing was labored, his magnificent hide dull with blood and dust. Yet his eyes remained alert, watching Mason with that same intelligence that had first stayed his hand all those months ago. Dr. Chen arrived near dawn with a medical team. "We've analyzed samples from the other razorbacks," she explained as her team worked to stabilize Goliath. "They're all genetically modified, but none to the extent he is. He's unique, the perfect bridge between their original design and natural adaptation to this world. Will he survive? Mason asked, the only question that mattered to him. Dr. Chen's expression was cautiously optimistic. His regenerative abilities are remarkable. With proper care, yes, I believe he will. In the weeks that followed, Hope's Landing began rebuilding. Communication with Earth was re-established, though any response or assistance would take years to arrive. More immediately beneficial was the new relationship with the Razorbacks, who under Goliath's leadership formed an unprecedented alliance with the human colonists. The once feared pests became partners in reconstruction. Their strength and resilience made them invaluable for clearing debris and rebuilding structures. Under Goliath's guidance, they learned to cooperate with humans, each species contributing their unique abilities to the colony's restoration. Mason oversaw this integration, becoming the unofficial ambassador between species. His bond with Goliath deepened as the great creature recovered from his wounds. Though the broken tusk never fully regenerated and a prominent scar remained on his flank, Goliath regained his strength and continued to grow, eventually reaching a height of 14 feet at the shoulder. His intelligence, too, continued to develop. Through Dr. Chen's communication research, they established increasingly sophisticated ways of exchanging information. It's remarkable, Dr. Chen told Mason as they watched Goliath directing his herd to help position a structural beam for a new medical center. He's not just intelligent, he's evolving. His brainwave patterns are becoming more complex. The neural pathways are reorganizing themselves. You think the aliens designed him to keep developing? Yes? Mason asked. Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps. Or perhaps this is what happens when their creation is allowed to develop naturally, with compassion rather than control. She glanced at Mason. You gave him something the aliens didn't respect for his autonomy. You let him become what he was meant to be. 6 months after the invasion, Governor Chen called a special colony assembly. Every surviving colonist gathered in the newly rebuilt Central Plaza, along with Goliath and representatives from his herd. The mood was solemn, yet hopeful. Citizens of Hope's Landing, the governor began, her voice carrying across the silent crowd. We gather today to commemorate our survival and formally recognize the alliance that made it possible. She continued with a recounting of the invasion and the critical role the Razorbacks had played in the colony's defense. Then, in an unprecedented gesture, she formally declared Goliath and his herd as citizens of Hope's Landing, with all the protections and responsibilities thereof. The declaration was met with unanimous approval, a far cry from the days when Razorbacks were hunted as pests. Governor Chen then turned to Mason. Mason Wilson, she addressed him formally. Your violation of colonial law and harboring a Razorback once earned my censure. Today, it earns my deepest gratitude and respect. This colony exists because you saw value where others saw only threat, because you extended kindness when others would have shown only fear. She gestured for him to approach the platform. Therefore, I am establishing a new position within our government Interspecies Affairs Director. You will oversee all matters concerning our new citizens and ensure their interests are represented in colonial decisions. Do you accept this responsibility? Mason looked at Goliath, who watched the proceedings with evident understanding. I do, he replied simply. As the assembly concluded, Lars approached Mason with a warm handshake. From outlaw farmer to government official, he teased. Quite the promotion. Mason laughed. Never thought I'd see the day when bureaucracy seemed appealing. Well, someone has to speak for the big guy, Lars pointed out, nodding toward Goliath. Though he seems increasingly capable of speaking for himself. Indeed, Goliath had become adept at using the communication devices Dr. Chen had developed, a combination of tonal generators and symbol-based interfaces that allowed complex exchanges of ideas between species. He used one now to address Mason, the synthesized approximation of Razorback communication translating roughly to new beginning, together strong. Mason placed a hand on Goliath's massive leg. Together strong, he agreed. The colony's scientists continued studying the abandoned alien technology, making gradual progress in understanding its principles. Most valuable were the genetic records recovered from their laboratory. These confirmed what they had suspected. The Razorbacks had been engineered centuries ago as part of a terraforming project designed to prepare Proxima b for the invaders' eventual colonization. What the aliens hadn't anticipated was how their creation would adapt over generations in their absence. The Razorbacks had evolved, developing a complex social structure and heightened intelligence that diverged significantly from their original programming. Goliath, with his unique genetic modifications, represented an evolutionary leap, a bridge between the artificial origins of his species and its natural development. They made a crucial error, Dr. Chen explained during a research briefing. They designed the Razorbacks to adapt to changing planetary conditions, but they didn't limit that adaptability. When they abandoned their project, the Razorbacks continued evolving without oversight. Nature took their framework and improved upon it. And Goliath? Mason asked. Why is he different? Our best theory is that he represents a rare genetic variant, perhaps a spontaneous mutation or recombination of dormant code. His coloration, size, and intelligence are all expressions of genetic potential that was latent in the species but rarely manifested. End quote. Governor Chen, who had been listening intently, asked the question weighing on everyone's mind. Will they return? The aliens? Dr. Chen's expression grew somber. Eventually, yes. Their technology is superior to ours, and they clearly value this planet. When they do, they'll come in greater numbers. Then we need to be ready, the governor declared. Accelerate research on their technology. Strengthen our defenses. Expand our alliance with the Razorbacks. Lars, now serving as head of colonial security, added, we should also prepare more traditional defenses. The next attack won't catch us so unprepared. As the others discussed strategy, Mason watched Goliath through the meeting room window. The great creature was overseeing a group of younger Razorbacks who were helping transport building materials across the settlement. There was an undeniable dignity in his, bearing a sense of purpose and responsibility that transcended his origins as an engineered species. In the year that followed, Hope's Landing transformed. No longer just a human settlement, it became a truly interspecies community. Structures were adapted to accommodate Razorback physiology. Communication systems were refined to facilitate cross-species collaboration. The colonial education system began including courses on Razorback culture and biology. Mason's role as interspecies affairs director kept him busy, but he always made time for Goliath. Their evening conversations on the porch of Mason's rebuilt homestead became a cherished ritual. Sometimes they discussed colony business or reviewed the day's challenges. Other times, they simply sat in companionable silence, watching the twin moons of Proxima b rise above the horizon. I never thought it would turn out this way, Mason confided one such evening. When I found you in that ditch, I was just trying to do what Alara would have wanted. I never imagined. Goliath rumbled softly, the translator rendering his response. Small actions, large consequences. Kindness creates possibilities. Mason smiled at the philosophical observation. Goliath's thought processes had become increasingly sophisticated, sometimes offering perspectives that challenged human assumptions. There was wisdom in his alien viewpoint, a different way of seeing the world that complemented human understanding. You know, Mason said thoughtfully, before the invasion, I was just existing, going through the motions since Alara died. But now, he gestured toward the thriving settlement visible from his porch. Now I feel like I'm living again, like there's purpose. Goliath's response was simple but profound. Find meaning together, different paths, same journey. The peace was shattered 18 months after the first invasion. Colony sensors detected multiple vessels entering the Proxima Centauri system significantly more than before. The alien invaders had returned, as promised, and in greater force. Hope's Landing mobilized immediately. The defense protocols developed since the first attack were implemented. Colonists moved to fortified shelters. The augmented colonial defense force took up positions around the settlement. And Goliath gathered his herd, now numbering in the thousands, preparing them for the coming conflict. The aliens established orbit but did not immediately attack. Instead, they initiated communication, something they hadn't done during the first invasion. They're requesting dialogue, Governor Chen informed the Emergency Council. They specifically asked to speak with the one who commands the Razorbacks. All eyes turned to Goliath, who stood in the specially reinforced section of the council chamber, designed to accommodate his massive frame. It could be a trap, Lars warned. A way to eliminate our strongest defender before they attack. Or it could be an opportunity to avoid bloodshed, Dr. Chen countered. They must have realized that simple force wasn't enough. Perhaps they're willing to negotiate. Goliath's translated response was decisive. Will speak, must know their purpose, must show strength. The meeting was arranged at neutral ground, a plateau, 5 kilometers from the settlement. Goliath would represent the colony, accompanied by Mason, Governor Chen, and a small security detail. The aliens would send an equivalent delegation. As they prepared for the encounter, Mason couldn't help feeling anxious. "Are you sure about this?" he asked Goliath as they traveled to the meeting site. "These are the beings that created your species, that abandoned you, that tried to kill you." Goliath's response was measured. Must understand creators to understand self. Knowledge brings power. Fear brings weakness. The alien ship landed precisely at the designated time. It was larger and more elegant than the vessels from the first invasion, clearly a diplomatic craft rather than a military transport. From it emerged 5 of the insectoid beings, their exoskeletons more ornately decorated than those of the soldiers they had fought. The leader stepped forward, activating a translation device similar to the one Dr. Chen had developed for Goliath. "I am High Commander Varix of the Teokari Expeditionary Force," it announced, its voice rendered in stilted but understandable human language. "We come seeking dialogue with the anomaly." Goliath stepped forward, his massive form dwarfing both humans and aliens. Through his translator he responded, "I am Goliath, protector of Hope's Landing, speaker for the Razorback Nation. You call me Anomaly. I call myself Free." The alien commander's compound eyes seemed to register surprise. "You have achieved independent cognition. Remarkable. Our records indicated the terraforming biomechanoids were incapable of such development." "Your records are outdated," Governor Chen interjected. "Much has changed in your absence." The commander turned its attention to the humans. "Your presence on this world was unexpected. This planet was seeded by our ancestors centuries ago, prepared for our eventual colonization. The biomechanoids, what you call razorbacks, were tools in that preparation. Tools that you abandoned," Mason pointed out. "They evolved, they built their own society, they have rights now, recognized by our colony." "Rights?" The commander's translator conveyed confusion. "These are engineered constructs, designed for specific functions. They are property, not persons." Goliath's response was immediate and forceful. "We were made, then left. We changed, grew, thought, chose, no longer tools, no longer property." A tense silence followed this declaration. The alien delegation conferred among themselves in their native language, clearly unsettled by this development. Finally, the commander addressed Goliath directly. "Our records show a genetic anomaly in your structure, a variant we had not authorized. You were to be terminated as a failed experiment. Yet here you stand, displaying cognitive function far beyond parameters." "How?" "Compassion. Compassion," Goliath answered simply, inclining his massive head toward Mason. "Was shown respect, given choice, allowed to become." The concept seemed difficult for the aliens to grasp. Their society, as they reluctantly explained, was rigidly hierarchical, with each member engineered for specific roles. The idea of allowing unplanned development of respecting the autonomy of a created being was foreign to them. The negotiations that followed were complex and often frustrating. The Teokari maintained their claim to Proxima B based on their ancestors' terraforming efforts. The colony representatives argued for their right to remain, pointing to the thriving settlement they had built. Goliath advocated for recognition of Razorback autonomy, presenting evidence of their social structure and intelligence. After hours of tense discussion, a provisional agreement emerged. The Teokari would establish their own settlement on Proxima B's southern continent, maintaining separation from Hope's Landing. Both species would share research and technology under controlled circumstances. Most significantly, the Razorbacks would be recognized as an independent species, Neither human property nor Teokari tools, but a new form of life with its own rights and territory. This is unprecedented in our history, Commander Varix admitted, as the terms were finalized. To recognize a created species as autonomous goes against our most fundamental principles. Yet the evidence cannot be denied. The experiment our ancestors abandoned has yielded unexpected results. Governor Chen signed for humanity. Goliath pressed his hoof into a specially designed biosensor for the Razorbacks. Commander Varix applied a complex genetic marker for the Teokari. A fragile peace was established, one that would require ongoing negotiation and adjustment. But peace nonetheless. As they returned to the settlement, Mason walked alongside Goliath, both processing the momentous events of the day. "Do you trust them?" Mason asked quietly. Goliath considered this before responding. "Trust grows slowly. Verify always. Prepare for conflict. Work for cooperation." Mason nodded, appreciating his friend's wisdom. "It won't be easy. 3 different species trying to share one world, each with their own history, their own needs and perspectives. Difference brings strength," Goliath observed. "Challenge creates growth. Separate paths, shared future." That evening, as news of the agreement spread throughout the colony, Mason found himself again on his porch with Goliath, watching the lights of Hope's Landing in the distance. The settlement seemed different. Now no longer just a human outpost on an alien world, but the beginning of something new. A place where different species could learn from each other, grow together, create something greater than any could achieve alone. "When I first found you," Mason said reflectively, "everyone thought I was crazy for keeping you. Just a dumb beast," they said, "a pest to be eliminated." He laughed softly. "If they could see you, no diplomat, leader, philosopher." Goliath rumbled with what Mason had come to recognize as amusement. "Still same creature, different circumstances, different possibilities. All beings contain multitudes. You know, Ilara used to say something similar," Mason recalled, feeling the familiar ache of her absence. Softened by time and new purpose. She believed everything deserved a chance to become its best self. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, the stars of Proxima Centauri's system emerging against the velvet sky. Somewhere up there, Teokari ships maintained orbit, their presence both a reminder of past conflict and a symbol of new possibilities. The future remained uncertain. The 3-species accord would face challenges, misunderstandings, perhaps even setbacks. But as Mason watched Goliath, once an abandoned runt, now a bridge between worlds, he felt something he hadn't experienced since those early days of the colony. Hope. Not just for survival, but for something greater. A new kind of community, forged through adversity and sustained by mutual respect. A place where humans, Razorbacks, and eventually perhaps even Teokari could transcend their differences to create something unprecedented in the galaxy. As if sensing his thoughts, Goliath turned his massive head toward Mason. Through the translator came words that perfectly captured the journey they had shared. From smallest beginnings, greatest changes grow. From one act of kindness, worlds transform. Mason reached up to place his hand on Goliath's leg, the gesture that had become their sign of friendship and trust. "Together strong," he said simply. Goliath's response rumbled through the night air, a promise and a vision for the future they would build. Together, stronger than alone, different paths, one journey, separate stories, shared world. Across Hope's Landing, lights glowed in human homes and Razorback shelters. In orbit, Teokari ships maintained their vigil. And on a small porch on the outskirts of the settlement, a human and the creature everyone had once laughed at sat together, architects of a future none had imagined possible. A future that had begun with one simple choice: mercy instead of fear, kindness instead of destruction. A future born when a human farmer had looked into the eyes of an abandoned alien boar and seen not a pest to be eliminated, but a life with value and potential. Sometimes, Mason reflected as Proxima B's twin moons rose above the horizon, the smallest choices make the greatest difference. Sometimes, the thing everyone dismisses becomes the key to salvation. And sometimes, against all odds and expectations, hope finds a way to land.